So it's a really great feeling to be second from last on a two-day conference, especially for if you're not that versed in presenting as Sebastian. And by the way, I'm also from Slovakia, so please don't call me Zuza. It has different context in Slovakia. So yes, let's talk about how to enable value-based bidding for your apps. Before anything, let's look at what are the types of events you might want to send value for. So first is the in-app purchase, standard. It's, of course, purchase which is processed through app stores. Second is a subscription that actually can be passed also as in-app purchase, but two more events, we'll look at that later, and it's also processed through app stores. Ad revenue is the third type of event that in Firebase it's tracked as ad impression, and as it's obvious, it tracks revenue from showing ads in your app. And then we'll look at other purchases, which are probably more relevant for non-gaming. Ideally, you would be sending it as purchase, and those are purchases tracked outside of app stores, processed outside of app stores. All right, so we'll look at two ways how to pass value. First is via SDK or tag, and second, later, will be about how to pass the value server-to-server side with the measurement protocol API. First, look at in-app purchases and subscriptions. That's kind of pretty easy, usually. IAPs and subscriptions are automatically tracked, almost always. There is a resource which I'll later also share with you, a doc, with the links to the resources. So for example, for the in-app purchase and the subscription events, we have really nice, more details about when they're being triggered. So that might be pretty relevant, along with parameters that are passed with the events. Here also, quite a nice resource, also linked in the doc. It shows the app subscription flow in GA4. I will not go through it bit by bit, because when I presented last time, it took 5 minutes. But yeah, here you can see if, it's clear, it's visible. So as I mentioned, subscriptions, you can have actually free events for passing subscriptions with value. First of all, in-app purchase, and then App Store subscription convert or App Store subscription renew. And if you need more information, actually me to go through the flow, feel free to ask at the party. So as I mentioned, the in-app purchases and subscriptions are automatically tracked, but you do still need to do some things. On Android, you need to link Google Play, and the option A is to link it to Firebase. Option B is to link Google Play with GA4. On iOS, also, IAPs and subscriptions can be tracked automatically if you're using StoreKit 1. If you're using StoreKit 2, it might require limited code. I forgot to mention there will be some code on some slides, but don't worry, it's not too much of the code. Okay, now let's look at tracking ad revenue. Also, ad revenue tracking can be pretty easy, depends. If you're using AdMob mediation platform, you only need to link AdMob with GA4 account, and then the ad impression would appear automatically. If you're not using AdMob, but you're using other mediation platforms, for example, Max or IronSource, you would have to tag the app in the place where the ad is shown, so that the ad impression event can appear in GA4. And of course, as always, please, whenever you implement something, at the end, validate your data, so that you see if the values appear correctly in GA4 and in Google Ads. All right, so this is the linking of Firebase to AdMob, again, also in the resource. And if you're not using AdMob, I think this is pretty clear. User is shown an ad. You need to ensure that where you're showing the ad, there is the tag, there is the code of the Google Analytics for Firebase SDK. And if it's correctly implemented, then you would see ad impression in your GA4 account. And if you have GA4 linked with Google Ads and the event is imported in Google Ads, ad impression should flow correctly there. Again, a piece of code. So if you're not using AdMob, but other mediation platforms, there are a few parameters. Ideally, you should pass them with the event. Ideally not, but obligatory for TROAS or VBB. you should be passing value and currency, obviously. Value, please pass it as a numerical value, not a string. This is not that uncommon problem. And currency, of course, the standard free letter. Then there are other 4 parameters. They are not that obligatory for the campaigns to work, but we've seen in the past that passing these 4 parameters could help clients identify if there was some problem with implementation. So they could look at, okay, so this ad unit name seems to be problematic, and then investigate a bit better. As I mentioned, after implementation, ensure that the ad revenue is tracked. This is the GA4 UI. You would look at events report and then ensure that ad impression shows some revenue in the total revenue column. Of course, also ensure that it's showing revenue for both Android or iOS, so you would have to filter the reports with the platform. In Google Ads, this might seem a bit tricky. So, of course, also verify that the value is being passed, that you can see the value, but the conversion count will always be 0 for ad impression. We've seen lots of clients asking about this. That's working as expected. And, of course, you would see some numbers for value if you're actually running some campaigns. So, normally, clients would have non-TROAS campaigns running before TROAS, so you can test it on those campaigns. You are running those, and then you see that some value starts popping up. And then you can launch TROAS. Okay, looking at tracking other types of purchase revenue. Normally, our clients use purchase event, actually really called purchase, to pass the revenue with the GA4 Firebase SDK. And again, flow is I think it's pretty clear. User makes purchase, you had to tag the app where the purchase is made. So that the event is later shown in GA4, and again with the Google Ads linking and conversion import, it shows in Google Ads as well. Again, getting a bit into the code, purchase event is made up of 2 pieces of code. Items, and items obviously are the products that your users bought in the purchase, so they have their own item level parameters. And then the second piece of the code of the purchase event is related to the actual purchase event, and it has its own event level parameters. Looking here at the items code, here we actually see on the screenshot 3 products, okay, jeggings, boots, ankle socks. And these are sample 6 parameters, or in GA4 we call them also item scoped dimensions. Just to mention item ID, you probably are aware of that if you're running already dynamic remarketing. That's obviously pretty important to pass. And also mention that the price parameter on the item level, it's actually not the parameter that later is used in the campaigns, okay? And this is the part of the code on the event level. The event also has its own parameters, transaction ID, affiliation, currency, and so on. Obviously, again, currency value, those are the parameters that will be used for the campaign. Again, please pass value as numerical, not a string, and currency, the 3-letter standard. Just to mention that in the past, if you are from those relevant verticals, you've obviously been implementing e-commerce_purchase, but that has been deprecated quite some time ago. And also, it actually did not support the item arrays, so you couldn't see all the products that clients bought. So please, moving forward, if you haven't yet, ideally implement the purchase event, because it has additional reporting advantages, and I'll mention also later. Okay. So if you implement it correctly, then please verify that the purchase value is tracked. Again, you would do that in the column total revenue in GA4. And actually, again, that can be a bit tricky. If you implement the purchase event with different name as purchase, you wouldn't see the value in the total revenue column. So it might look like you haven't implemented it correctly, although you did. So that's the advantage that I also mentioned, that for certain events, it's good to actually go forward with the recommended namings. And again, ensure that you're passing it correctly for Android and iOS. And in Google Ads, that you can see actually some conversion value And this time, of course, you should again see some conversion numbers. And again, the note that you need to have actually active campaigns. So if you see zeros, but you don't have any active campaigns, don't freak out. Just a note about the conversion settings of value. So there is a standard setting of use value from Firebase. And if there's no value, then use X, USD, or euros. We actually suggest you don't set any static values because in case your implementation is not correct and you set some static value, that can be slightly confusing. You'd be like, I don't see such high value, but I mean, it's non-zero, it's higher than 0. So it can be actually more difficult to find out what's the problem, whereas if you have just 0, it's pretty clear. Okay, now look at maybe, depends, but potentially a bit more complex thing. So how to send value via S2S. So GA4 Measurement Protocol API, first of all to mention, I'm not sure if all of you have heard about that, but that's the API with which you can send events to GA4 so that you see in reporting those events. So what you can send with the API, the purchase via SDK, normally you would be sending the value which the users paid, right? Like the whole gross value of the purchase. But from whatever reason, maybe you want to be sending just part of that value. I don't know, maybe some net profit or whatever. So with the measurement protocol, you can send just that. So one of my clients recently implemented a measurement protocol, and that was also one of the reasons that they knew it was a food delivery, and they knew that at the moment of purchase, they didn't know what was the net margin, and they actually had to calculate it on their servers and then send it with the API. Second stuff you might want to send is predictive lifetime value. And that's mainly if most of users' value actually comes after certain conversion windows, such as 7 to 14 days. Basically, the third point is anything. You can send to measurement protocol anything if it's according to the specifications, because if it's not, then it wouldn't even appear in GA4 reports. Now, talking a bit about pLTV, if you haven't heard about it, but I think probably everybody, but if you don't know how it could work. So first of all, a new user would take some actions, probably some key actions in your app, and maybe even like first actions such as first purchase, subscription, or not even that such important actions, but maybe at least some actions which show certain engagement, such as sign in, sign up for newsletter, and so on. Then, based on those actions and or based on attributes of those users, your data team would create a predictive lifetime value model, and they would try to calculate the predicted LTV. After that, the engineering team would integrate with the measurement protocol API and sense that value in an event. And after that, the marketing team would import the lifetime value event in Google Ads and select it for optimization. So, as mentioned, when should you use pLTV? Especially if a large portion of your revenue comes in after 7 to 14 days since install, because our product team mentioned to us that they're actually pretty confident about hitting the 7 to 14 days conversion window target. However, you can, of course, always test longer than 7 to 14, but I've heard also from colleagues in Google that longer than 14, maybe the pLTV is better when you're sending the data earlier. And also, for example, if you have apps which have large variation in the value of users. So, for example, you'd have most users which probably have some average LTV, but some users are your whales. Maybe not a great idea to do pLTV because still it's pretty complex. I mean, I think the part of actually creating the model is the worst. I think that's the most work there. So don't do it if most revenue comes in within first 14 days, and also if vast majority of users have more or less the same LTV. All right, getting again a bit technical. So the measurement protocol API uses app instance ID as the device identifier, not at ID or IDFA that you've maybe heard of as identifiers on Android or iOS. If you've ever implemented or integrated with measurement protocol for API for web, on web you have to use the client ID. So those are like parallels, if that helps. The app instance ID you can retrieve either with SDK via some method, or you can get it from BigQuery. It's in the schema, it's actually uses pseudo ID, so it doesn't have to be so intuitive. Yeah, is it visible? Yeah, okay. So this is again like the parameters that you need to be passing. Every event which you send to API is a post request, and it consists of two parts: query parameters and JSON post body. Query parameters are obligatory and basically would be the same always, and it's pretty easy to know. You can review later. And the JSON post body, that's where I mentioned you need to be sending app instance ID, the device level identifier, and also the other two red events and events name. We also have a code lab where you can try to send the first payload, and of course, like more resources. Again, those are added into the doc at the very end. Okay. So if you're sending, don't start sending the events to measurement protocol API immediately before validating them. And validation is being done on validation server. So the validation server has a special URL, and the reason being is that the actual API, the production API, to which later you'll be sending the data when all is good, is not returning error code. So even if the data is not being passed correctly, you will not know it. They will just not appear in the GA4. So always validate on validation server, and then when all is good, send it to normal measurement protocol. We also have some event builder there that can be useful. A sample event, this is how it looks like, post the Firebase App ID API secret, and then in the JSON body you can see the parameters. The value and currency, again, for TROAS would be the crucial. Again, value as numerical and currency, the 3-letter format. So here are some tips and tricks when sending a pLTV. So as with any app campaign, or probably any campaign, the sooner you send pLTV, the better. Of course, you need to find a balance there between being able to predict more or less correctly the data. So like day 3, day 7, that's still fine. But even up till 14, when our product team mentioned they're confident with 14, then feel free even to use day 14. Okay, pretty important and not a common knowledge. You cannot adjust pLTV value on apps once you send it. So let's say on day 1 you would send value of 10, and then on day 2 you would realize that the user is not, he doesn't have value of 10 but only of 5. So you send 5. But the system will understand that the user is valuable 15, 10 plus 5. So system will do sum up, okay? So what I've been advising to my clients is that probably be a bit more conservative with the predictions, rather send something which you're pretty sure with. Make sure to keep the app instance ID up to date in your databases because they can be refreshed sometimes. So if you don't send the most updated one, then the system will not be able to match the SDK data with the measurement protocol data. Also, so this is a bit related with the tip of sending the data as soon as possible. So please avoid sending infrequent batches of events. I think it's standard. If you already have to be sending events in batches and not in real time, ideally send them in daily. I think on the screenshot before there was also consent signal, but so that you know that user consent choices are retrieved from SDK, so no need to be sending consent signals in the measurement protocol data. And small tip, avoid sending timestamps with pLTV. So timestamps you might want to be sending if you want events to appear in reports under certain date, because let's say the user really performed that event at that time. But when you're sending pLTV, it's not really about when the user performs the action, but it's about when you calculated the value and when you sent it to us. So it's kind of like arbitrary time, and it doesn't really make too much sense. Plus, it adds the complication that if you would want to send event with timestamp more than 48 hours in the past, it actually wouldn't get processed. Okay, so just drop timestamps, they're optional. Some last comments. Web views, that's pretty important. Lots of our clients use web views, so their app is not fully native. And they're using also some web layer there for lots of complex or secure functions. Lots of my retail clients, for example, use use web view for checkout, which is totally fine. It's just so that you're aware that it does add some tracking complexity. If you don't do anything and you just use whatever tracking you have in the web, probably GTag or any other tracking, not only Google, so if we're talking about GTag for simplicity, the events would show, events in WebView would show in GA4 as web events. And if you import them into Google Ads, they would still show as web event. So for that, to fix that, if you want to use those events also in app campaigns, for example, you need to implement WebView tracking via JavaScript handler. I'm getting into details there. And that's kind of like a bridge between the web and native layer. So it appends some app layer attributes to the web layer and effectively enables those events to show as app events and for you to later select them in app campaigns. Okay, and I like that we're talking quite a lot about Web to App Connect. So it seems that you're already more familiar with them, with those campaigns. So starting with the fact that we're talking about apps, so quite naturally you're probably thinking about doing TROAS with app campaigns. However, you can do TROAS also via web campaigns with the Web to App Connect if you implement app deep links. Of course, that means you're getting users which already have app installed, so obviously engaged with you already in some way. So it's not really user acquisition, but still it's a TROAS. So if you plan on doing ACE TROAS, this can be a good option as well. Some notes there, if you want to do VBB via web campaigns, so make sure that your app and web events track revenue with the same way. So if you decide that your web events send the full gross value, do the same thing with app events. If you decide that your web events are just, you're sending only the net margin, let's say, then do the same also with app events. Sweet advantage of doing TROAS via web campaigns is that you can use both Firebase and other conversions, for example, AAPs. So you're not limited. Again, still keep in mind that you can't do conversion adjustments for app conversions, which can be a bit confusing because you'll be able to do that with your web events, but not with your app events. And again, make sure to include both Android and iOS, especially if you already have deep linked both of them, both platforms. So this is my last slide, trying to also share with you. Those are the first is the link to resources, so that you don't have to be looking up if this is relevant to you. And second, so as I mentioned on a few spots, conversion adjustment for apps are not yet available. If you would be interested in those, please provide your opinion, okay? All from me. Oh, well, if there are any questions.